In the great humanitarian superpower of Sweden, terrorists get to stay in taxpayer-funded hotels, whilst the victims of terror get deported. That is, in many ways, better than in Germany, where the victims of terror get to be re-victimized since the terrorists aren't even known to exist, and when that doesn't work, the police sides with them against the victims. In some ways, the best is in the United Kingdom, where the police pretends neither the victims nor the terrorists even exist, all while the public is busy condemning the individuals who still cling to some sense of order and civilization. Speaking of the United Kingdom, it is now controversial over there to say in public that women don't have penises. Thank God my primary school teacher recently died. I wouldn't want her to hear this. In other news, you might soon need a loicense for a balloon at your birthday party and also a license to stack up rocks on a beach. Oh, and your phone? Well, it may not be your phone anymore in Australia because the government wants to make it an offense to even attempt to be secure in your papers. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone and welcome to the 24th installment of Periodic Insanity. Alright, lots of insanity lately, but nowhere near as much as the last time, so I seriously hope I'll be able to get through all of it in just one episode. So, starting with two pieces of news which are part of a pattern that's been forming for several years now, namely that even if you are to buy the excuse that mass immigration is merely the consequence of various countries of Europe trying to be humanitarian, the practice is quite the opposite. It is precisely those who should be protected that are never protected and sometimes actively harmed by the state, whilst the criminals get everything they want and then some off the taxpayers' dime. So, coming from Aftonbladet, the flagship newspaper of the mainstream left in Sweden, victim of a terrorist attack, deported from Sweden. And it goes like this, quote, Ukrainian Irina, 38, survived a terrorist attack on Drottninggatan but was forced to have her right leg amputated. When Stefan Löfven got to the hospital, he promised to do his best for me, she says. Now she and her daughter are being expelled from Sweden. She went to Orleans to buy a keyring for her then 12-year-old daughter Sofia. It was April the 7th, 2017, and 38-year-old Irina saw the truck for a second before it hit her. The sound of the bang resembled nothing she had heard before. It sounded like the thunder of a roaring train. She saw people running in panic. It was chaos, and she heard terror being shouted. After the attack, Irina was in hospital for 3 weeks for emergency care and was operated several times, or she suffered surgery several times. Her right leg could not have been saved and had to be amputated from under the knee. In the hospital, she was visited by Prime Minister Stefan Löfven. He promised to do his best for her. In Irina's journal from Karolinska University Hospital, it is stated that Löfven and the trauma management have decided that she will receive rehabilitation in Sweden until, I guess, protestation is the correct translation here. Protesättning is the word being used. It basically means the moment when a condition, usually related to one's ability to move, or a motor condition, can be sort of fixed by prosthetics. Anyway, back to the article. He said, namely the Prime Minister said, everything would be fine, but this is not good, she says. We met in her temporary apartment, a basement room south of Stockholm, which she rents. She has lived here for over a year with her daughter Sofia, now 13, who goes to a Swedish school. Sofia's school does not start until next week, and now she's swimming with some friends. I'm sitting mostly at home. I have severe pain in my leg, says Irina. The uncertainty has been difficult. She has hitherto had a temporary residence permit because she was part of a criminal investigation as an accuser and witness and would testify to the now imprisoned Rahmat Akilov, this spring. It has been a few days since the letter from the Swedish Migration Board has arrived. They reject her application for permanent residence and work permit, both for her and for her daughter. The decision states, amongst other things, that it was not found that you can now take care of yourself and you have a social network in the form of a family and relatives in your home country, close quote. The Swedish Migration Board also considers that the medical care and rehabilitation she needs from now on is available in her home country, and their decision to expel her to Ukraine does not violate the European Convention. Irina and her daughter Sofia have a couple of weeks to voluntarily leave the country. When I read the decision, I cried for several days. I get panic attacks and suffer from post-traumatic stress. The attack is constantly present. I need help. Now it's just a question that spins in my head. Why? Why can't I get the help I need here? Together with her public counsel, she will appeal against the decision. Now, just wait. Again, my lawyer says it can take months. I have to be strong. By now she has learned to walk with a denture, which is now next to the leather sofa in the kitchen, but because it has become so big, she will have to buy a new prosthetic. She takes pain relievers, sleep pills and antidepressant drugs daily. I feel alone, feelings go up and down, I can also feel angry, but at the same time I'm very grateful for all the help I have received so far here. I have food on the table, a home, but I still need to get help. In Kiev, Irina was an aide to university teachers. After that, she worked as a private and preschool teacher. She played basketball, painted paintings and was good at making manicures. But she wanted to see the world, so she traveled to countries like Israel, Poland and the United States, and she worked, among other things, as a nanny. She had been in Sweden for a short period before the attack. Here she felt at home and saw a brighter future here than in her native country. I have no future in Ukraine. The country has big financial problems. It is expensive to get medicine and I have had to change the prosthesis every other 3 months. I will not be able to get the same care there. And how can I support my 2 children? The attack has changed my life. Sometimes I feel I have no life. In January, Aftonbladet and Irina returned to Drottninggatan and the place where her life changed just in a few seconds. By her side, she had Kristina Malmqvist, who was one of the people who found Irina and carried her a few blocks to the ambulance. Irina could not feel her body at all at first. But then she saw her leg. I started to cry. I did not know if I was injured in several places on my body. I thought, I'm invalid, I'll die, my life is over, she has said then to Aftonbladet. Ahmad Akilov was sentenced to life in prison and expulsion for the terror attack at Drottninggatan in early June. 5 people were killed in the attack and 15 more injured. So, translation. The illegal immigrant who permanently mutilated this lady gets to stay in a taxpayer-funded hotel that the Swedes still have the gall to call it a prison. The legal immigrant who literally did nothing wrong gets deported right after the state secured her testimony in one of the biggest terrorism trials in Europe. Way to go, Sweden! Way to go! Now, as for the technicalities, it's probably true that the Migrationsverket, or the Swedish Migration Board, is correct about the point on the European Convention, but Sweden, unlike many others under this Prime Minister, marketed itself as a humanitarian superpower, not bound by the constraints of international treaties and basic practice of law. So it is thus absolutely fair to judge them on that standard, rather than the standard we'd reserve to Bulgaria or the United States, countries that don't virtue signal for the whole planet to move there. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that the terrorist attack is, in part, the fault of the state. The inability of the state to uphold law and order should be a factor. After all, given what I've learned about this lady from other articles, it would have been the case that she would have left Sweden eventually, just like she left Poland, Israel and the United States. But since she's now severely injured through no fault of her own and through some fault of the Swedish state, the least they could do is not kick her out after they secure her testimony. And they could bloody give her a work permit she wants to work. Thirdly, this is not an isolated incident. Sweden is notorious for giving safe harbor to jihadis and terrorists in general, while at best ignoring actual victims and sometimes even actively prosecuting them or persecuting them. This, my fellow deplorable, is insane. But I guess the good news for Sweden is that they're not the only ones. Sweden is not alone in this practice of insanity. There are many other insane governments in Europe, and by that I mean almost all. Here's the next one. I met my Islamic State captor on a German street, titles the British Brainwash Corporation. Quote, a Yazidi teenager sold into slavery by Islamic State has told the BBC of her terror after she escaped to Germany, only to come face to face with her captor in the street. Ashwaq was only 14 when the Islamic State fighters stormed into northern Iraq, including the heartland of the Yazidi people. They took thousands of women as sex slaves, including Ashwaq, sold for $100 to a man named Abu Humam. Raped and beaten, she managed to escape 3 months later and then went to Germany with her mother and one brother. A few months ago, on the street outside a supermarket, she heard someone call out her name. Ashwaq told the BBC, on the way back to school, a car pulled up next to me. He was sitting in the front seat. He talked to me in German and asked, are you Ashwaq? I was so scared, I was shaking, and I said, no, who are you? She said, he then replied, I know you are Ashwaq, I am Abu Humam. Ashwaq said then he started to talk to her in Arabic and told her not to lie to him. I know you, he said, and where you live and who you live with. He knew everything about my life in Germany. She added, I never in my life believed that I would see something like this in Germany. I left my family and my country and went to Germany to forget the beating and the pain. The last thing I expected was to meet my Islamic State captor and that he would know everything about me. Germany's federal prosecutor says Ashwaq reported the incident to the police 5 days after she said it took place. Ashwaq says she told investigators everything, including her harrowing experiences in Iraq. Officers made an e-fit of the suspect and told her to contact the police immediately if she saw Abu Humam again. She says she also told the police to check the supermarket CCTV, but says this did not happen. I waited for a whole month, she says, but received no news. Fearful that she would see her captor again and wishing to be reunited with 4 of her sisters who had since been rescued from the Islamic State, Ashwaq returned to northern Iraq, leaving behind the town of Schwäbisch Gmünd, where she had hoped to start a new life. If you haven't been through it, you won't know what it's like. It goes straight to your heart, she said. When a girl is raped by the Islamic State, you can't imagine what it's like when you see this guy again. Frauke Köller, a spokeswoman for Germany's top court, says police made every effort to locate Abu Humam using the e-fit image and Ashwaq's testimony, but were unable to find him. By the time they contacted her again in June this year as part of the investigation, Ashwaq had already left for Iraq. However, activists in Germany say her case may not be an isolated incident. Düsen Tekal, an activist and founder of the Hawar Help, a Berlin-based organization which campaigns for Yazidi rights, says she has heard of several cases where female Yazidi refugees recognized Islamic State fighters in Germany. Ashwaq herself says she heard similar accounts from other Yazidi girls who had escaped the jihadists. Not all cases are reported to the authorities, however. Back in Kurdistan, now living in a Yazidi camp, Ashwaq still wants to continue her education, but both she and her family also want to leave the country. We're scared of the people of the Islamic State, her father told the BBC. But her experience in Germany has had a profound impact on Ashwaq. If the world was destroyed, I would not go to Germany again, she said. Like many Yazidis, her family is now applying to live in Australia as part of a special program for women abducted by the Islamic State. What? I mean, seriously, can anything further be added? And no, please don't give me the usual excuses, because I ain't buying any of that. I mean, Germany is the place where you get your house raided for saying something politically incorrect on the internet, or for downloading from a torrent tracker. And you're telling me nobody could locate an active ISIS enslaver who has clearly been in Germany for long enough to actually learn about this girl's whereabouts and job? Give me a freaking break, mate. Besides, how come this wasn't, at the very least, recorded as a hate incident? Serious question. Because, look, if I go to Germany and I'm not very careful with what sign I make with my hand when I wave for a taxi, I get whisked away to a county jail in no time, and before I smoke a cigarette and call my lawyer, the whole brouhaha is already recorded in the federal database of hate crimes. But this Abu whatever can do this and the best the police can do is a sketch portrait? Please. I'd rather believe fairy tales are real. It's definitely a lot more plausible than this. Essentially, everything we have been speculating in early January of 2016 is slowly turning out to be, at the very least, mostly true, if not bang on, right on the money. If you remember, more than 2 years ago, many of us speculated that the German police is basically playing in the same team as the terrorists, whilst the taxpayers, citizens or legal immigrants, have literally no one to defend them in a country where self-defense is, for all intents and purposes, illegal. We were told we were overreacting at the time. I know I said I wish and indeed hope to be proven wrong. More than a few times I remember saying that, but as time goes on, it seems pretty clear to me that we were much closer to the truth than I hoped and wanted to back in January 2016. Also, has anyone noticed something about these two cases? I mean, I hate to bring this up, but I kinda have to. In the Swedish case, the victim is a white female. In the German case, the victim is Yazidi, one of the few groups of white people in that area. In both cases, the perpetrators are diverse. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not making the alt-right case here. Sweden has an impeccable track record of harming Somalis and Afghanis who happen to be secular and non-Muslim too. Germany is also notorious for deporting Africans who were prominent dissidents and were fleeing ruthless dictators, while at the same time making sure to keep around the Africans who have since then formed entire crime syndicates in the country. So I'm not making the case that the German or Swedish authorities are necessarily anti-white racist, though they could be. But I am suggesting that they might indeed be dhimmis, because the consistent element in most of these cases, including the ones that we've covered here, is the religion of peace, rather than the quality of being diverse. Being diverse, for instance, didn't quite help Ayaan Hirsi Ali or the already hundreds of Somalis who, like this Yazidi girl, found out that after 20 years of civil war, significant portions of Somalia are still much safer than many areas in Sweden dominated by a certain religion of peace. And while Sweden has a good opportunity in less than a month in the election to change the course, the Germans just voted for a lot more of the same, suggesting that no matter how much common sense we would try to spread, the Germans actually like the current state of affairs. So, who am I to question their democratic will? Now, speaking of people voting for their own destruction and not questioning their will, here's another example, this time from Sadiq Part and Parcel Cons, London. That's what happens when you bring acid. Shocking moment. Vigilantes beat man with a bat, then pour milk on him while he covers on London street after spotting he had corrosive liquid, titles the Daily Mail. Quote, this shocking footage reveals the moment a gang of vigilantes beat a man in the street after he tried to attack people with acid. The suspect is shown being kicked to the ground outside Maryland train station in East London and battered with a plank of wood before having milk poured over him. A mob claimed to have caught him shortly after he had thrown acid inside the shop after someone refused to hand over some change. He manages to get back onto his feet after the beating before fleeing the scene on his rental bike. The witness who filmed the attack, who asked to remain anonymous, said, I saw someone on a bike wearing a mask go up to a guy coming out of a shop and says, boss, give me some change. The guy he was talking to politely declined and then he said, at least let me take a drink. But the guy told him to go away. He then got off the bike and went straight for his pocket, pulled out the bottle and started throwing the substance inside the shop towards the guy's direction. He ended up taking the bottle and throwing it away, and then he and his pals started beating him up. He got wobbling everywhere, then went in his pocket and took the knife out. Then he jumped on his bike and rode off. Some of the substance hit the other guy in the eyes and he was complaining about having irritated eyes, so we gave him water to wash his eyes and then got him a cab to the hospital. It comes amid soaring rates of acid attacks across Britain, with more than one a day recorded in London alone just last year. Joanne Rand became the first person to be murdered with acid in the United Kingdom after she was splashed from head to toe by General Webster in June 2017. And last December, Arthur Collins, the ex-boyfriend of reality TV star Fern McCann, was jailed for 20 years for an acid attack in a nightclub in Dalston, East London. Footage of the latest incident was filmed by a witness who shared it on Facebook. It shows that the alleged acid attacker lying face down in the road outside Maryland Railway Station in Stratford, surrounded by a group of men. As he stands up, a man kicks him back to the tarmac and somebody in the crowd shouts, "Kill him, bro." Another man attempts to intervene, but the first man continues to kick and stomp him while he's down, making him scream out in pain. The cameraman then warns, "Yo, if you bring acid ever again..." A second man then doses the suspect with what appears to be milk and boots him in the back. The crowd shouts, "Kill him, bro, pussy." Somebody then strikes him with a plank of wood. A second video shows the man back on his feet, appearing to threaten the mob as someone says he has a knife in his hand, leave him. They then back off as he gets on his yellow rental bike and pedals away. The Metropolitan Police says it could find no record of the incident having been reported, close quote. Gee, I wonder why. I mean, how do you do this? Hello, the Metropolitan Police? Yeah, I'd like to report an offense. I tried to throw acid in someone's face and a bunch of dudes caught me in the act and beat the living crap out of me. I mean, like that? On a more serious note, other outlets have claimed that the so-called vigilantes are Polish men, a piece of information which I could not confirm, but let's assume for a second that they were indeed Polish. If that's the case, let me say this. Bad move, fellas. Seriously, bad move. Why stand up for Brits? What have the Brits done good for you? And I mean specifically Brits, not the British government. Your average Brit has been hating on Polish people, especially Polish men, for almost 15 years now, and have consistently been voting for more diversity and progress and a lot less white Christians from Poland and somewhere else, really. So why stand up for them? And the same question goes for every other inter marium group that has been involved in protecting British citizens from the consequences of their own stupidity. I actually tried to track down the Romanian guy who protected over 20 people, almost all of them British citizens, last June during the attack on London Bridge and Borough Market. He's currently avoiding press attention and trying to recover himself mentally after the whole trauma somewhere in rural Romania. But I wanted to ask him the exact same question. Why? Why bother? I mean, that guy, Florin Murariu is his name, had his whole life destroyed and turned upside down by both the British government and your average peaceful and kind British people who then refused to even take his money for rent out of fear of being known as Islamophobic in the community. I'm not joking. In many ways, he suffered a lot more after the terrorist attack than during it. He had the instincts on what to do during a crisis, but nothing was able to prepare him for the perfidiousness of the British people. So why should anyone, especially from the inter marium, stand up for these people? Out of the goodness of our hearts? I mean, these people, the British people that is, have been spending the last decade and a half whining about the people from the inter marium. Fine. I say get the hell out of there and let them have their part and parcel piece in Sadiq Khan's shithole. Why not? Again, I'm working under the assumption that the so-called vigilantes are indeed Polish men, and some outlets have suggested. But if they're not, and they are British men, then great. In that case, I say finally. How about 2,000 or 3,000 more such incidents? And how about you start taking your country back? Now that would be awesome. But even more so than that, how about some agitation to start shifting those bloody voting patterns? Because make no mistake, empathy for London is in very short supply since Londoners have actually, honest to God, voted for this lunacy. Which is why I cannot and will not take seriously whenever someone, or anyone really, from the United Kingdom has anything bad to say about the Intermarium. Bitch, please. I mean, we may be corrupt over here sometimes, but nowhere near as corrupt as to allow our police forces to consistently turn a blind eye as our people are being mutilated and slaughtered by invaders and criminals. I mean, I'm just saying. Speaking of corrupt, has anyone noticed that all British outlets published censored pictures and video from this incident? I mean, what kind of a press is that? Instead of putting a clear shot and saying, warning, if you see this man, call the police and seek shelter, they're censoring his face. The guy that's throwing acid, I mean. Basically, throwing acid randomly into people's faces is all good, but heaven forbid you dare to stand up for yourself and or your community without a loicense. That's what the press is saying. Now, speaking of loicense, multiple idiots in the United English Emirates are seriously suggesting introducing a license for acid. Because we all know that licensing processes stop crime. But then again, this is the country where you get arrested for having a potato peeler in public without a license. Anyway, let's shift gears and talk about the inherent insanity of the cathedral's narrative on sexual politics. And I insist to say the cathedral's narrative because the actual people are waking up in droves to this nonsense. Little by little, this thing is being pushed back to where it belongs, namely in the far fringes of the society. But as usual, the press is amongst the last to find out. So, until they find out, we get to read insanity like this. Anti-trans vandals are plastering vile "women don't have penises" stickers around London, titles Pink News, the most respectable news outlet for anything non-straight. So basically, the loons in the tranny religion would have us believe that such an innocuous and undeniably true phrase like "women don't have penises" is not only controversial, but somehow bigoted and bad. Now, the article is pretty long, but I will read most of it because it's important to be up to date with that corner of insanity, and I will explain why. So, quote, "Trans campaigners have criticized anti-trans bigots after a number of disgusting phallus-shaped stickers carrying the phrase 'women don't have penises' were found across London, including on Stonewall's office building. A Twitter user posted images of the stickers on Sunday, August the 5th, which were also shown struck onto an electrical box outside the offices for The Guardian and The Observer, and on an advertisement board showing a painting of Elizabeth I for the National Portrait Gallery. Responding to the images, Sarah Brown, a member of Stonewall's Trans Advisory Group and a trans woman, told Pink News, quote, "These stickers are puerile and disgusting. There is a strong push to demonize trans women in the United Kingdom, and I really worry where it's going." The Twitter bio for the user who posted the images called Anne Rosillo XX, including the hashtag #GetTheL_Out, which is affiliated with controversial anti-trans group Get the L Out. The user has also tweeted in support of the group. However, Get the L Out told Pink News that it was not responsible for the stickers. Owl, a non-binary trans activist and filmmaker, condemned those behind the stickers, telling Pink News, quote, "This is comparable to teenagers trying to be funny and drawing penises everywhere. It's incredibly immature, childish, and ridiculous. It just continues to show that these fringe groups of activists are desperate and slowly unraveling with their activism. I have yet to find another group of people than anti-trans bigots that are as obsessed with genitals as these people are. It's honestly really sad that they fall into these incredibly binary ways of obsessing over trans people's bodies and it forms harmful stereotypes about gender, sex, and bodies," close quote. In July, Get the L Out, a group of lesbians opposed to the government's proposed reform of the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, hijacked the front of Pride and London's parade and were able to lead the march for much of the route. In response to this, a group of pro-trans activists led Brighton Pride the next day. The activists carry the banner with the hashtag #LWithThe, which has been used by lesbians in a show of support and solidarity for trans people. Fox Fisher, a non-binary trans activist, told this seems to be a desperate response to trans people and their allies putting up stickers and paste-ups around Brighton, and the continued support for trans people and are getting from LGBT organizations and pride parades. Trans groups are now leading parades all around the country, showing that divisive and harmful views held by anti-trans bigots aren't tolerated in our community. The support we are getting is incredibly important, as we don't have the same resources as many of the anti-trans bigots and access to the media as they do, and these are one of the only ways we can raise awareness. We're constantly being put into a reactionary position against bigots, and we never get to speak in the media without being in response or literally sitting across from someone who thinks we are self-hating lesbians that mutilated our bodies, or perverts, or abusers, or a danger to children. Maybe you're all of them. A Stonewall spokesperson told Pink News, "A movement of lesbians is currently using the hashtag #LWithThe to reject the views of a small but vocal minority who are determined to create division. What this movement shows is the power of solidarity and why it is so important to stand up against hate. We're encouraging everyone from across the community and beyond to be fierce allies. We're also strongly encouraging everyone to fill in the government's public consultation on the Gender Recognition Act so that we can achieve acceptance without exception. We have a responsibility to raise each other up and stand united. Together, we are stronger." Angela C. Wilde, a member of the Get the L Out, told Pink News, quote, "Given the bad press your publication has spread about our action and the naming of lesbians as a hate group, I'm not quite sure why I respond to you. However, these stickers are not a hashtag Get the L Out action. We do support their message, as we believe in biological reality of the sexes, not in the fairy tales the gender ideology is enforcing on us. You will find that lesbians exist, are everywhere, and are pissed off of the silencing and coercion of the GBT has been enforcing upon us. We hope and encourage lesbians and women to carry out such actions everywhere." Close quote. Alright, so this matters, not just because it's fun to see the genderist ideologues squirming as they try to wish away reality, although that's a good reason too, but this matters because these degenerates are consistently trying to change governmental policy in ways that essentially nobody outside of a minuscule subgroup of non-straights really wants. Acceptance without exception? Really? How about you tell that to the lady serving time in jail for petty theft that ended up being raped in jail by a fellow inmate who was a trans woman? I'm sure she'll be happy to talk about acceptance without exception, for sure. Or perhaps you could talk with your fellow allies in the Muslim community to accept without exception the possibility of women being imams because they identify as men. I'm sure that will go down really well and without a fuss, of course. I mean, we all know it's the religion of peace, right? Ultimately, this tranny agenda needs to be fought tooth and nail at every corner until it's shoved back to where it came from, namely the far fringes of the society, the neighborhoods where everyone knew are full of insanity, disorder, and degeneracy, and thus no fine gentleman and certainly no fine lady would visit them for any reason. That is where the transgender ideology belongs. And when that will happen, and it will, the tranny activists will have no one to blame but themselves. Really? I mean, think about it. Nobody had anything with the trannies simply existing and minding their own business and paying for their selective and elective medical procedures by themselves for decades. Quite literally, nobody cared. It all changed when they started producing aggressive propaganda that pissed off almost everyone. Because make no mistake, the struggle described in the story I just read to you is an intra-leftist struggle, because even most of the left is uncomfortable with the whole tranny agenda. Not to mention the working class, which is immediately turned off by the topic, which is one of the reasons why I always suggest bringing it up whenever you're doing local agitation. The tranny activists have overplayed their hand and should thus be punished for it by shunning. It is abnormal to support policy that effectively abolishes single-sex facilities. The sexes are real and different from each other. And yes, they do need time apart from each other, especially on a voluntary basis. Trying to abolish that to please a minuscule group of mentally disordered people is not only unfair, but cruel to the men and women who actually do prefer to be in the company of their own sex from time to time. That's just how normal people think, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, in the small minds of these radicals, not only wanting to spend time in a single-sex setting is bigoted, but choosing to sleep with the opposite sex is also bigoted. And they have a study to prove that as well. Well, not really, but they do believe that. Study, people don't want to date transgender folks, and no, this is not transphobic, titles the Daily Wire. Now, as a side note, the author of this piece, Mrs. Amanda Prestigiacomo, is a fine author whose reporting is almost exclusively on the trending thoughts surrounding sexual politics on the far left. So, if you don't want to do it like me and actually read the leftist writings, you could follow her. She's almost as good as following the loons yourself. Anyway, quote, a new study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that an overwhelming majority of folks would not date a transgender person, but wish to date a person of the sex and corresponding gender they are attracted to. When the study is broken down further, a near majority of those who claim they would date a trans person do so in relation to their biological sexual orientation and not in line with the gender the trans person believes themselves to be. In other words, people generally wish to date people who belong to the sex they want to date. This was not only shocking to them.us, a pro-LGBTQ blog, but was chalked up as discrimination driven from transphobia. The study asked some 958 participants, 951 cisgender, that would be people who identify as the sex and gender they biologically are, and 7 transgender people ranging from 18 to 81 years old, which gender they would consider dating: cis male, cis female, trans female, and or genderqueer. Now I wonder where they found the 18-year-old tranny. They must have found the only one in the world, really, I mean, judging by the life expectancy of trannies. Anyway, in total, only 12% of those surveyed said they date a trans male or trans female. When looking at those who identified as straight, only 1.8% of the females and 3.3% of males said they date a trans person. The number were so low for those who did not identify as straight. Only 11.5% of the males and 29% of the females were trans-inclusive in their dating preferences. A closer look at the numbers and you can see a larger divide by attraction based on sex and not the ambiguous and progressive definition of gender. Them.us surprisingly reports, quote, surprisingly, among the 127 participants open to dating a trans person, almost half selected a trans person of a gender incongruent with their stated sexual orientation. For example, 50% of the trans-inclusive straight women and 28% of the trans-inclusive gay men were willing to date a trans woman, even though one wouldn't expect either straight women or gay men to be attracted to women. Similarly, 50% of trans-inclusive straight men and 69% of trans-inclusive lesbians said they'd only said they date a trans man, even though both groups are presumably only attracted to women. And 33% of the trans-inclusive bisexual/queer participants said they would only date a trans person of one gender but not the other, even though one may expect this group to be attracted to multiple genders. Them.us claims the survey findings are undoubtedly due in part to cis-normativity, cis-sexism and transphobia, all of which led to lack of knowledge about transgender people and their bodies, discomfort with the unknowns, and fear of being discriminated against by proxy of one's romantic partner. The site also noted an interesting pattern of discrimination against trans women in particular. This is, in short, crazy talk. It makes perfect sense that folks would overwhelmingly wish to date people belonging to the sex they wish to date. Further, the general aversion to dating trans folks doesn't necessarily reveal quote-unquote transphobia, but affirms the reality that sex and gender cannot be totally separated. It's natural for a person attracted to men, for example, to wish to date a biological male who also identifies as male. Again, this should not be chalked up to a fear of trans people. Even them.us tepidly concedes some of this reality. Quote, "It is also possible that at least some of the trans exclusion is due to the fact that for some people, sexual orientation might be not just about the partner's gender identity, but attraction to specific body types and/or judgment of reproductive capabilities," says the site. Close quote. Gee, you think? Okay, now in all fairness, I introduced this piece of news solely for the good laughs and to further illustrate just how insane academia has gotten. I mean, seriously, kids, don't go to college at all, or if you do, stay the hell away from anything that ends in studies. It's all garbage, really. Now, speaking of garbage, prepare for a war on balloons, environmental experts say, titles the New York Post. The joyous celebration of releasing balloons into the air has long bothered environmentalists who say the pieces that fall back to Earth can be deadly to seabirds and turtles that eat them. So as companies vow to banish plastic straws, there are signs balloons will be among the products to get more scrutiny, even though they're a very small part of environmental pollution. This year, college football powerhouse Clemson University is ending its tradition of releasing 10,000 balloons into the air before games, a move that's part of its sustainability efforts. In Virginia, a campaign that urges alternatives to balloon releases at weddings is expanding, and the town in Rhode Island outright banned the sale of all balloons earlier this year, citing the harm to marine life. There are all kinds of alternatives to balloons, a lot of ways to express yourself, says Kenneth Lacoste, first warden of New Shoreham, Rhode Island, who cites posters, piñatas, and decorated paper. But decorated paper means trees being cut. Now, after they're done with the balloons, the eco-Marxists will come after your decorated paper. You all know that's what they'll do. That is why these retarded initiatives must be fought tooth and nail. Anyway, back to the article. Following efforts to limit plastic bags, the push by environmentalists against straws has gained traction in recent months, partly because they're seen as unnecessary for most. Companies, including Starbucks and Disney, are promising to phase out plastic straws, which can be difficult to recycle because of their size and often end up as trash in the ocean. A handful of US cities recently passed or are considering bans, and the push may bring attention to other items people may not have considered, like festive balloons. The issue of straws has really broadened the marine debris issue, says Emma Tong of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Now here's something for Trump to dismantle. People might not realize balloons are a danger, she says, because of their light and whimsical image. Balloons are not among the top 10 kinds of debris found in coastal cleanups, but Tong says they're common and especially hazardous to marine animals, which can also get entangled in balloon strings. Chelsea Rocham, an assistant professor of ecology at the University of Toronto, says people should think systemically about waste and pollution, but that efforts to bring attention to specific products shouldn't be dismissed as too minor. If we said that about everything, we wouldn't get anything done, she says. Already a few states restrict balloon releases to some extent, according to the Balloon Council, which represents the industry and advocates for the responsible handling of its products to uphold the integrity of the professional balloon community. That means never releasing them into the air and ensuring the strings have a weight tied to them so the balloons don't accidentally float away. Lorna O'Hara, executive producer of the Balloon Council, doesn't dispute that marine creatures might mistake balloons for jellyfish and eat them, but she says that doesn't mean balloons are necessarily causing their deaths. Clean Virginia Waterways still thinks balloons can be harmful, included in its report last year a photo of a soaring bird with a deflating balloon trailing behind it. The report addresses the rising concern of balloons, which also often use helium, a non-renewable resource. It notes the difficulty of changing a social norm that even by typing "congrats" in a Facebook post results in an animation of balloons. It even claims the media play a role in that some groups conduct balloon releases just so reporters will cover the event. We don't want to say don't use them at all. We're saying don't release them, says Laura McKay of the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. Some states, such as, of course, California, ban balloon releases for other reasons. Pacific and Gas Electric, which also serves Northern and Central California, says metallic balloons caused 203 power outages in the first 5 months of this year, up 22% from a year ago. Lacoste thinks other towns, particularly those along the coast, will also ban balloons as people become more aware of environmental issues. He notes that plastic bags were once seen as harmless, but many places now ban them, close quote. This is, in short, lunacy. Even if you are to believe all of the premises of all of the far-left so-called environmental concerns, this is still lunacy. At the same time, this is a very good example of how the far left operates. Anything to restrict fun, anything to restrict speech, and anything to obfuscate the ultimate goal, which is, and has always been, a fundamentally unfree, poor, and totalitarian society. That is what the left wants. They've always wanted that. The means to get there have changed several times as they've lost or enough people figured it out in time. Even in this article, they say in the same breath that, oh, come on, we're not saying no balloons, just don't release them, and then one paragraph later they bring up plastic bags and brag about how they convinced many idiot politicians and of course lots and lots of idiots in the public to basically ban them. And they fully expect most people will not see the connection. And why wouldn't they expect that? I mean, seriously, most of the time the utter nonsense that the environmentalists promote has been swallowed hook, line and sinker by most of the public, at least for a while. The reality, though, is that if you're really concerned about the environment, then 100% of the environmental agencies, funds and organizations should relocate to India, China, Eastern Russia, and perhaps Thailand. That's it. Solve those and you've solved most of the problem in a systemic way, as the left would put it. And this holds true for literally any so-called environmental concern that is being used in Europe and North America to strip us of our economic liberty for the sole purpose of empowering the state and enriching the left's cronies, who, I'm sure it's by coincidence, just almost always happen to be the only ones who manufactured the newly approved quote-unquote eco-alternatives. For instance, take air pollution. If you read the so-called reports on air pollution and quality of air in Europe, you'd think air here is worse than it is in Shanghai. However, if you take a look at a map with real-time monitoring of the quality of air, things suddenly look quite nice. For instance, on this map, green is excellent, yellow is moderately good, orange is unhealthy, and red is really bad. As you can see, there are 5 or 6 orange points, 2 in Germany, 2 in Poland, and 1 in Turkey. That's it. No red points. I mean, the ones that you see on the map are actually flags, so it's the flag of, what's there, Morocco, Tunisia, Albania, and I believe Lebanon is there, if my geography is good enough. So yeah, quality of air is excellent in more than 80% of Europe, and at the very least moderately good in more than 99% of Europe. But you wouldn't know that if you were to listen to the environmentalists who are constantly busy banning more and more stuff. Like in England, where the environmentalists want to ban rock stacking. No, seriously. I won't read you the article because we're running out of time, but I'm mentioning just to further drive the point home. And the point is this: even if you do believe in all of the insane and consistently disproved hypotheses that the environmentalists peddle, their actions and their policy prescriptions are still, almost always, not just illiberal, totalitarian and cruel, but downright insane. Alright, one more piece of news to bring to your attention. Australians who won't unlock their phones could face 10 years in jail, titles Naked Security. The Australian government wants to force companies to help it get a suspected criminal's data. If they can't, it would jail people for up to a decade if they refuse to unlock their phones. The country's Assistance and Access Bill, introduced this week for public consultation, strengthens the penalties for people who refuse to unlock their phones for the police. Under Australia's existing Crimes Act, judges could jail a person for 2 years for not handing over their data. The proposed bill extends that up to 10 years, arguing that the existing penalty wasn't strong enough. The bill takes a multi-pronged approach to accessing a suspect's data by co-opting third parties to help the authorities. New rules applies to communication service providers, which is a definition with a broad scope. It covers not only telcos but also device vendors and application publishers, as long as they have a nexus to Australia. These companies would be subject to two kinds of government order that would compel them to help retrieve a suspect's information, close quote. The article goes on to explain how is this supposed to work. Now, the Australian fans of this channel should get to work ASAP. Get yourselves involved in that public consultation and try your best to get this stopped. Basically, the government is trying to do what the government always does: expand itself and its power to more and more facts and facets of private life under the justification of security. It is on you to resist. Now, admittedly, nobody, or at least not everyone, can be as extremist as I am, but most people can and should. Stop using those damn smartphones! I mean, seriously, why would you carry a supercomputer with a GPS at all times in your pocket? Really boggles my mind. And I'm sorry, but the excuse that I needed is just stupid. Smartphones have been around for less than a decade. We were still doing international trade, publish videos on YouTube, watch them in a cafe, send emails and all the rest in 2005, when literally nobody had a smartphone. No, you do not need it. The first step to treat this is to be honest with yourself. You want it because it's convenient to externalize your thinking. Anyway, if you're gonna use them, then for crying out loud, stop storing sensitive data on them. There's such thing as hard drive for sensitive data. If one hard drive is not offline in your drawer, then it's not private. If it is in the cloud, then that means it's on someone else's computer and you don't own anything. Seriously, just be responsible with your data. Do that, and most of this insanity can be avoided in practice. These kinds of laws are dangerous precisely because most people are irresponsible, and that includes most criminals too, by the way. If people in general had been more responsible with their data, these kinds of laws either would have never existed or they'd have been irrelevant. Anyway, basically try to work to prevent such laws from being passed, but at the same time start working on practicing liberty as a lifestyle choice. The latter will bring immediate benefits to you personally, regardless of government policy. I mean, just saying. Alright, that's enough. And lo and behold, we've gone through the entirety of Insanity Q in one episode. Well, it might turn out to be a little bit longer than usual, but still, we got through all of it in one episode. Great! So, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your consistent and generous support. Please do consider throwing a few dollars my way if you derive any value from the work being done here. Soon enough, the Jordan and Israel tour is beginning, so any shekel would be particularly helpful at this point in time. Don't forget to subscribe to my social media, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.